For centuries, the Zel'thar Dominion ruled the stars with an iron fist, crushing all opposition with overwhelming force. Humanity was just another species in their empire, a minor inconsequential race until they rebelled. The war was one-sided. Earth's fleets were outgunned, outnumbered, and on the brink of extinction. But then came the Whispers, the myth of an ancient warship built in secret, lost to time. And when the Dominion prepared to strike the final blow against humanity, the myth became reality. Welcome to HFY Genesis. I put my heart and hard work into bringing you the most epic, high-quality HFY sci-fi stories, and your support means everything. If you love tales of humanity overcoming impossible odds, epic space battles, and first contact war stories, then you're in the right place. Before we dive into today's adventure, please take a second to like this video, drop a comment, and subscribe to HFY Genesis. It helps more than you know. It keeps this channel growing and allows me to bring you even more incredible stories. Now, let's get into it. The last battle. The void of space was on fire. Captain Dane Kessler gripped the edges of his command console, his knuckles white, his body held together more by sheer will than by any real hope. The bridge of the UEN Valiant, one of Earth's last surviving battle cruisers, was bathed in red emergency lighting. Sirens wailed, sparks rained from damaged consoles, and the ship groaned under the relentless onslaught of the Zel'thar Dominion's warships. The enemy was everywhere. Through the shattered viewport, he saw the remains of the UEN Vanguard, a proud capital ship just minutes ago, now reduced to a drifting graveyard of twisted metal and frozen bodies. So many dead, so many lost. The Dominion fleet moved methodically, precisely, like a predator playing with its prey. They didn't fear humanity. They never had. Because to them, humanity was already dead. No escape. Shields at 18% and falling. Lieutenant Mara Voss, his weapons officer, called out. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled over the controls. "Return fire," Kessler barked. "Focus all railguns on their forward line. Keep them back." "Sir, our main battery is offline," Chief Engineer Holt Reyes shouted from the lower deck, his face covered in soot. "We're running on fumes down here," Kessler cursed under his breath. This wasn't a battle. It was slaughter. The UEN had launched its final counteroffensive with over 200 ships. Now, less than a dozen remained, and those that still fought were barely holding together. The enemy outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed them. The Dominion's flagship, Virex Wrath, loomed ahead, a jagged obsidian fortress of a ship, its weapon arrays glowing with plasma energy. It moved forward, positioning itself for the final kill. The comms crackled. A deep, guttural voice filled the bridge. Humans. The screen flickered to life, revealing the monstrous form of High Lord Virek, 7 feet tall, reptilian, with blackened armor and cold, merciless yellow eyes. His mandibles clicked as he studied Kessler, like an entomologist observing an insect. "This defiance ends now." Kessler's jaw clenched. He refused to kneel. "You want our surrender, you bastard," he growled. "Come and take it." Virek's mouth twisted into something akin to amusement. "Foolish, but expected." The transmission cut, and then the Dominion fleet opened fire. The breaking point. The Valiant shuddered violently. Plasma lances carved through its hull. The ship's left wing was completely sheared off, sending bodies spiraling into the void. Kessler was thrown against the console, his head slamming against cold steel. His vision blurred, his ears rang. The screams of his crew filled the comms. "This is UEN Crusader. We're losing integrity. Mayday, Mayday. Valiant, we need cover. Our engines are failing. They're everywhere." Silence. One by one, the last human warships winked out of existence. Kessler struggled to his feet, gripping the railing as the Dominion ships closed in for the kill. His mind raced. No escape, no reinforcements. This was it. The UEN was about to die, and then a new signal flashed across the battlefield. The myth becomes reality. "Sir," Mara gasped, her eyes wide. Something's coming out of slipspace. Kessler barely had the strength to focus on the sensor display. But when he did, his heart nearly stopped. Space ripped apart. A massive distortion flared across the Dominion's formation as a singular object emerged from the void. A ship. But not just any ship. A warship of impossible size. Its hull was black as the abyss, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. The Dominion fleet hesitated for the first time. They had no records of this vessel. It bore no transponders, no markings, no identification. And then, a name appeared on the Valiant's scanners, UEN Revenant. Kessler felt his breath catch. Impossible. It's a myth, a ghost story told among officers. A warship built in secret, lost to time. And yet, here it was. And when the Revenant opened fire, the entire war changed. The first strike. A white-hot beam of energy lanced across the void. It didn't just damage the Dominion's flagship, it tore straight through it. Virex Wrath split in half, its core detonating in a silent explosion. The Dominion fleet froze. Kessler could hardly believe what he was seeing. One shot, one kill. This isn't human technology. More beams followed, precise, devastating. Dominion warships that had dominated humanity for decades were reduced to debris in seconds. And then, the Revenant's comms activated. A voice filled the bridge. Calm, cold, absolute. This is Commander Elias Vale of the UEN Revenant. Captain Kessler, stand by. We are taking control of the battlefield. The Revenant moved like a phantom, its weapons systems activating in ways that should be impossible for human engineering. The Dominion fleet panicked. They had never feared humanity before. Now, they were afraid. The tide turns. Sir, Mara whispered, awestruck. They're running. Kessler watched as the Dominion fleet began retreating, their commanders scrambling to escape the unknown terror that had just entered the fight. The battle was over. No, not over. It had just begun. The Revenant had revealed itself, and now the galaxy would never be the same again. The battlefield was eerily silent. Where moments ago, the Zel'thar Dominion's war fleet had moved with the precision of a predator stalking its prey, now they hesitated. Their rare flagship, Virex Wrath, was gone. A shattered husk drifting in the void, torn apart by a single devastating shot. And at the center of it all, the UEN Revenant loomed. Captain Dane Kessler still struggled to believe what he was seeing. He gripped the railing of the UEN Valiant, his battle-damaged command ship, his gaze locked on the massive warship that had emerged from nowhere. It wasn't just a battleship. It was something else entirely. Its hull was black as the abyss, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. It moved without sound, without warning, without anything resembling conventional propulsion. Its weapons weren't human. This wasn't just an advanced Earth warship. This was something far beyond anything humanity had ever built. And yet, it bore a UEN designation. Commander Vale, do you read me? Kessler's voice was hoarse. He wasn't even sure if this ship had comms, but a moment later, a voice crackled through the bridge speakers. Calm, cold, absolute. We read you, Captain. Stand by. The Dominion fleet was still reeling. Their commanders were scrambling for answers. Their warships, designed to conquer, to subjugate, were hesitating. For the first time, they didn't know what to do. And that was an opportunity. We can't waste this. Kessler took a breath. Mara, relay to the fleet. Regroup behind the Revenant, let it take point. Lieutenant Mara Voss, his weapons officer, looked at him in disbelief. Sir, are we sure it's on our side? Kessler had no idea. But at this point, what other choice did they have? A warship like no other. The Revenant moved like a phantom. It didn't just fly, it glided, shifting through space with unnatural precision. Then it opened fire again. White-hot beams of energy sliced through the Dominion's fleet, tearing through 3 enemy warships in seconds. Kessler's bridge crew watched in stunned silence. "What kind of weapon is that?" Mara whispered. No one had an answer. The Revenant's guns were unlike anything in the UEN's arsenal. They weren't plasma. They weren't railguns. They weren't missiles or torpedoes. They were something else, and whatever they were, they worked. More Dominion ships began retreating, breaking formation. Their once unshakable unity was crumbling. For the first time in the history of this war, humanity had them on the run. The commander of the Revenant. The Revenant's comms activated again. "Valiant, this is Commander Elias Vale. I'm ordering a full counter-offensive. Your fleet is to rally behind us and advance." The name sent a chill through Kessler. Elias Vale was dead, or at least he was supposed to be. Official records showed that Vale had perished decades ago during the early skirmishes of the war, and yet here he was, alive, commanding a warship that shouldn't exist. What the hell is going on? Kessler steadied himself. He didn't have time to process this now. He activated the fleet-wide comms. "All remaining UEN ships, advance with the Revenant. Push them back." The remnants of Earth's once proud fleet, barely a dozen warships strong, surged forward. And this time, they weren't retreating. The Dominion's retreat. The Zel'thar warships scrambled to respond, their commanders desperately trying to regain control of the battle. But they couldn't. The Revenant was too fast, too precise, too powerful. A Dominion battlecruiser attempted to flank it. The Revenant blinked, not jumped, not accelerated, but blinked across space. One moment it was in their sights. The next, it was behind them. That's impossible. A beam of energy lanced through the enemy cruiser. It detonated instantly. The remaining Dominion forces panicked. Their warships turned, engines burning hard, making for the nearest escape vectors. The mighty Zel'thar Dominion was running. A roar of cheers and disbelief erupted across the surviving UEN ships. Mara exhaled sharply. "They're retreating. We actually made them run." Kessler barely heard her. His focus was still on the Revenant. "What the hell are you?" The truth about the Revenant. Hours later, Kessler stood aboard the Revenant's bridge. The ship's interior was cold, dark, almost unnatural. Everything was sleek metal and glowing interfaces with no visible controls. It didn't feel like a UEN ship. And then he saw him. Elias Vale, standing there, alive, unaged, unchanged. Kessler narrowed his eyes. "Commander Vale, I don't know what's going on here, but I need answers. Where did this ship come from?" Vale's expression was unreadable. "You already know the answer, Captain." Kessler shook his head. No, I don't. We, humanity, didn't build this. Did we?" Vale was silent for a long moment. Then finally, "No, we didn't." The words hit like a hammer. Then where did it come from? Kessler stared at the walls of the ship, at the technology that defied logic, at the weapons that shouldn't exist. And suddenly, humanity's victory didn't feel like a victory at all. The throne world, Zel'thar Prime. The throne chamber of Supreme Warlord Drekvas was carved from obsidian and crimson alloys, a palace befitting the ruler of an empire that had crushed dozens of species under its heel. Massive banners hung from the walls, displaying the symbols of conquered worlds. A new banner had been prepared, the broken emblem of the United Earth Navy. It was meant to be raised today, following the complete annihilation of humanity's fleet. But something had gone wrong. Drekvas stood in silence, staring at the holographic battle report. His golden eyes, usually burning with conquest, were narrowed in something else. Something unfamiliar. Unease. At the center of the hologram, above the wreckage of the Dominion fleet, was the ship, black as the void, weapons beyond classification, a warship that shouldn't exist. It had annihilated his forces at Epsilon Eridani. It had shattered his fleets without suffering a single scratch. And the worst part, the humans hadn't built it. A warlord's rage. The silence was broken by the trembling voice of strategist Zel'thar, one of the Dominion's top military minds. His exoskeletal fingers twitched as he knelt before the warlord. "My lord, the Revenant exists." Drekvas's eyes snapped to him, burning with fury. His mandibles clicked aggressively. "Do you take me for a fool? Of course it exists. I have seen the footage." His clawed hand slammed down onto the console, cracking the reinforced metal beneath it. The other generals flinched. "What I want," he growled, "is an explanation." A nervous glance between the warlords. None had one. "It defies all logic," Zel'thar finally admitted. "The humans had no fleets left, no advanced technology, and yet this ship appeared." Drekvas leaned forward, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "Then where did it come from?" Zel'thar hesitated. Then he said the one thing no one dared to say. "We don't know." Silence. A long, suffocating silence. Then, the chamber trembled. Drekvas ripped his ceremonial blade from its sheath and drove it through the table, sparks flying as the weapon pierced the metal. His rage was barely contained. For centuries, the Zel'thar Dominion had never feared an enemy. They had stood unchallenged, unbeaten, until now. The Dominion's darkest hour. "How many ships did we lose?" Zel'thar swallowed. 70% of the fleet. Drekvas exhaled slowly. 70%. Gone. It was a humiliation, a defeat worse than any in their history. "And the humans?" Zel'thar hesitated again. "Minimal losses. The Revenant protected them." Drekvas clenched his fists. It wasn't just that they had lost. It was how they had lost. The humans had not been stronger. They had not been more skilled. They had simply possessed something the Dominion could not understand. Something more powerful than warships, strategy, or firepower. The Revenant. And where there was one, there could be more. A new strategy. The hunt begins. Drekvas turned toward his warlords, his fury replaced by cold, calculated resolve. "We have underestimated humanity for the last time." The War Council stood at attention, mobilized the Grand Armada. A murmur of disbelief spread through the chamber. The Grand Armada was the largest military force in the known galaxy. It had never been fully deployed in one war. It was a weapon of last resort. "But my lord," Drekvas cut off the protest with a glare. "We are not going to war, strategist." He turned back to the hologram of the Revenant, his golden eyes dark with intent. "We are going to hunt." Unanswered questions. "My lord," Zel'thar said carefully, "what if the humans did not build it?" Drekvas's expression did not change. He had already considered this. If humanity had discovered the Revenant, then someone, somewhere, had built it. And if another species had created this ship, then what else had they built? For the first time in his reign, Drekvas was unsure of what awaited them in the void. But one thing was certain. They could not allow the humans to keep the Revenant. They would take it, or they would destroy it, no matter the cost. The final order. Drekvas turned to his warlords, his voice iron and fire. "Find that ship. Bring me the Revenant, or burn the humans to the last." Across the Zel'thar Dominion, the war machine roared to life. The greatest hunt in history had begun. And for the first time in 4,000 years, the Dominion was afraid. If an alien empire suddenly feared humanity, how do you think they would react? Would they seek diplomacy or unleash destruction? Let me know in the comments. Enjoying the story? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share for more HFY Sci-Fi epics. A warship. Unlike any other captain, Dane Kessler had seen his fair share of warships. He'd commanded them, fought aboard them, and watched too many of them burn. But this was something else entirely. The UEN Revenant wasn't just a warship. It was a riddle, a ghost, a legend that shouldn't exist. And now he was standing aboard it. The air inside was cold, sterile, unnervingly silent. Unlike any ship he had ever set foot on, the Revenant's interior was seamless. No exposed wiring, no control panels, no visible access points. The walls were sleek, black metal, pulsing with a faint blue energy, as though the ship itself were alive. The footsteps of his crew echoed through the corridors as they followed Commander Elias Vale, the man who was supposed to be dead. Kessler had questions, and he wanted answers. A commander returned from the dead. "All right, Vale," Kessler said, voice tight. "We need to talk." Vale didn't stop walking. He moved with an ease that suggested he was used to being here, like he belonged here. That made Kessler's skin crawl. "Where has this ship been?" Kessler pressed. "Who built it? And more importantly, how the hell are you still alive?" Vale finally stopped. Slowly, he turned to face Kessler, his expression unreadable. "I was never dead," Vale said simply. "I was here." Kessler frowned. "Here? What does that even mean?" Vale exhaled slowly, running a hand along the cold metal wall. "It means," he said, "that the Revenant was never lost. It was hidden, waiting." Kessler's blood ran cold. Waiting for what? Not human technology. Lieutenant Mara Voss, Kessler's weapons officer, was already scanning the ship's systems with her handheld analyzer. Her brows furrowed. "Sir, I don't think we built this." Kessler shot her a look. "Explain." She hesitated before saying, "There are no standard UEN operating systems here. No human-made AI, no recognizable engineering schematics. Every control input is," she gestured to the walls, "integrated, almost biomechanical." Vale nodded. "Because this ship isn't entirely human-made." Silence. Kessler's mind raced. "Then who built it?" Vale's jaw tightened. "That's the question, isn't it?" Kessler felt a slow chill creeping up his spine. For years, humanity had fought the Zel'thar Dominion with everything they had. And now they had a warship beyond anything they could have dreamed of. But if they hadn't built it, then someone else had. And if that someone was out there, had they just revealed themselves? A power beyond understanding. Kessler shook off his unease. "Let's focus on what we do know. How does it fight?" Vale smirked. "Like nothing you've ever seen." He gestured toward a nearby console. The metal shifted, forming an interface out of thin air. Voss gasped. "It responds to thought commands?" Vale nodded. "Partially. The Revenant systems are semi-autonomous. It calculates threats faster than any human crew ever could. That's why it moved the way it did in battle." Kessler crossed his arms. "And the weapons?" Vale's smirk faded. His voice dropped. "They're not conventional." He tapped the interface. The walls around them shifted, revealing holographic projections of the Revenant's armaments. Primary cannon, unknown energy-based weapon. Observed effects, instant destruction of enemy capital ships. Secondary batteries, quantum pulse emitters, defy conventional shielding. Defensive systems, adaptive phasic shielding, observed to resist all known forms of attack. Propulsion, non-Newtonian, no visible thrusters, defies standard physics. Kessler exhaled. "This thing is beyond us." Vale nodded. "Yes, and that's why the Dominion is afraid. Because the Revenant didn't just win battles. It rewrote the rules of war." The first hint of the truth, Kessler turned toward Vale, his mind buzzing with unanswered questions. "You still haven't told me where it came from," he said. Vale hesitated. Then finally he spoke. "We didn't find the Revenant," he said. "It found us." The words hung in the air like a ghost. Mara swallowed. "What the hell does that mean?" Vale met Kessler's eyes. "It means," he said carefully, "that someone, somewhere, left this ship for us. And I think they've been waiting for humanity to find it." A chill ran through the room. Because if that were true, then who had left it behind? And more importantly, were they coming back? The Zel'thar's next move. Across the galaxy, in the throne room of Supreme Warlord Drekvas, the Dominion's most feared warlords gathered around a holographic projection of the Revenant. Their species had ruled the stars for 4,000 years. They had never feared an enemy, until now. Drekvas turned to his warlords, his golden eyes dark with rage. "Find this ship, take it, or burn the humans to the last." Because the Revenant wasn't just a warship. It was a message, and the Zel'thar were about to answer. The final order. The moment the order came through, the galaxy shifted. For centuries, the Zel'thar Dominion had never deployed the Grand Armada in its entirety. It was not necessary. No species had ever posed enough of a threat. But now the impossible had happened. A single warship, a ghost, a myth, had ripped through their fleets, turned the tide of battle, and humiliated the Dominion in front of the entire galaxy. And that could not be allowed. From the throne chamber of Supreme Warlord Drekvas, a transmission went out to every Dominion fleet commander. "Mobilize. We will not waste time hunting the Revenant. We will end this war in one decisive strike. Burn Earth." The gathering storm captain Dane Kessler stood on the bridge of the UEN Revenant, staring at the intelligence reports flashing across the holographic display. "They're coming." "All of them," Lieutenant Mara Voss whispered, voice tight with disbelief. She wasn't exaggerating. The Zel'thar Grand Armada was moving. More than 5,000 warships. Every dreadnought, every battleship, every planetary assault cruiser. An entire Empire's war machine, all aimed at one target. Earth. A chill settled over the bridge. "Sir," Chief Engineer Holt Reyes muttered, rubbing a hand down his face, "we can't stop that. Even with the Revenant, we're outnumbered 100 to 1. He wasn't wrong. For all its power, the Revenant was still just one ship, and humanity's fleet. Barely 50 warships remained. It wasn't a battle. It was a funeral march. The choice that would define humanity. A silence stretched over the command deck. Then Commander Elias Vale spoke. "There's only one way to win this." Kessler turned toward him. "I'm listening." Vale's expression was unreadable. "We don't fight them in orbit. We take the fight straight to Zel'thar Prime." The bridge crew stared. Voss blinked. "That's suicide." But Kessler understood instantly. The Dominion's fleet was on the move, but their homeworld was left vulnerable. Zel'thar Prime was the beating heart of their empire, the center of their command structure. If it fell, the Dominion fell with it. Kessler exhaled, his mind racing. It was insane, reckless, desperate. But was there any other option? Earth couldn't withstand a direct invasion. They had to strike first. We either bring the war to them, or we lose everything. Kessler set his jaw. "Prepare the fleet," he ordered. "We leave for Zel'thar Prime immediately." The assault begins. The Revenant, and what was left of the United Earth Navy, emerged from slipspace above Zel'thar Prime. Kessler's breath caught in his throat. The planet was a fortress world, orbital defense stations, planetary shields, a fleet still guarding its skies. And yet, it wasn't enough. The Revenant fired its first shot. A beam of searing white energy lanced from the warship's hull, piercing straight through the planetary defense grid. In an instant, entire stations disintegrated. The shields collapsed. The Dominion panicked. They had prepared for a siege. They had not prepared for a warship that could rewrite the rules of battle. Kessler's comms lit up. Dominion generals broadcasting in terror. "What is that thing? How are they doing this? We're losing control." For the first time in history, the Dominion was afraid. The final gambit. But one warship wasn't enough to destroy a world. The UEN needed a way to end the war in one decisive blow. Kessler turned to Vale. "You have a plan," he said. Vale nodded. "We don't destroy the planet. We destroy their leadership." At the heart of Zel'thar Prime was the Imperial War Nexus. an armored command structure buried deep beneath the surface, linked to the Dominion's entire military network. If they could take it out, the Dominion would collapse. We need to land on the surface, inside their capital. The bridge was silent. Even for them, this was madness, but it was also their only chance. The drop Kessler strapped into the dropship as the Revenant descended toward the surface. Outside the viewport, the planet burned. Human warships engaged enemy defenses, the sky a chaotic mess of fire and destruction. The dropships launched, a direct assault on the Dominion's most heavily guarded stronghold. This was it, humanity's last chance. No turning back now. Kessler exhaled. The doors opened, and he jumped into the fire. The fall of the Dominion. The Zel'thar throne world burned. Captain Dane Kessler stood at the edge of the Imperial War Nexus, the command hub of the Dominion's entire military infrastructure. Behind him, the last of humanity's forces had pushed through the capital's defenses. The once invincible empire lay in ruins. The air was thick with smoke, fire, and the echoes of a dying regime. And yet, something didn't feel right. Kessler turned to Commander Elias Vale, whose expression was as unreadable as ever. "It's over," Kessler muttered. "We won." Vale didn't respond, because he didn't believe that. The signal A sharp beep interrupted the silence. Lieutenant Mara Voss hurried over, her face pale, eyes locked on her scanner. "Sir, you need to see this." Kessler frowned and stepped closer. The holographic display flickered, revealing a strange anomaly near the edge of the system. A signal. Not Zel'thar, not human. Something else. "A distress call?" Kessler asked. Mara shook her head. "Number it's..." She hesitated. Vale stepped forward. "It's a response." Silence. Kessler felt something cold settle in his gut. A response to what? Then it hit him. To the Revenant. Not alone. The UEN. Revenant had turned the tide of war. Its weapons defied understanding. Its technology was centuries ahead of anything humanity had ever built, and now someone else had noticed. Vale's voice was quiet. Too quiet. "We weren't meant to use this ship." Kessler turned to him, his chest tightening. "What are you saying?" Vale's gaze was distant. The Revenant wasn't just left behind. It was left here. Like bait. A shiver ran through the room. Then who left it? And why were they watching? The arrival. The warning klaxons blared. Mara's console flashed red. Something just exited slip space. Kessler's heart pounded as the display zoomed in on the outer system. A rift in space had formed beyond the wreckage of the Dominion's last defense fleet. Something massive was coming through. Not one ship, an entire armada. The bridge fell silent. No known configuration, no Zel'thar signatures. A presence unlike anything in recorded history. Then, for the first time, they heard it. A transmission. "You have taken what is not yours." The voice was deep, mechanical, and ancient. And suddenly Kessler realized the terrible truth. The war wasn't over. It had just begun. The war that should have ended. The Zel'thar Dominion was gone, their fleets shattered, their throne world reduced to ruins. For the first time in history, humanity stood victorious. Yet, as Captain Dane Kessler stood aboard the UEN Revenant, staring into the abyss of deep space, he felt no sense of peace. Because something else had arrived, and it was watching. The new arrival. The unknown armada loomed just beyond the wreckage of Zel'thar Prime. Hundreds, maybe thousands of warships. No known configuration, no familiar markings, no communication, except for one cryptic message. "You have taken what is not yours." Kessler exhaled slowly. His pulse was steady, but his thoughts were racing. "What do we do?" Lieutenant Mara Voss whispered, eyes locked on the massive alien fleet. Kessler glanced at Commander Elias Vale, the man who had brought them here, the man who had piloted the Revenant back into battle, the man who had known, all along, that this warship wasn't entirely human-made. Vale's voice was quiet. We wait. Silence fell across the bridge. Wait. For what? The warning. A new transmission came through. This time the voice was clearer, deeper, heavier, not mechanical, not organic, something in between. Your kind was not meant to wield this power. The crew tensed. The voice continued. We have observed your war. We have seen your defiance. We have measured your worth. A long pause. And then, you are not ready. Kessler felt the weight of those words. Not a declaration of war, not a threat, a judgment. The choice. Vale turned to Kessler, his expression unreadable. We need to decide what we are, Captain. Kessler frowned. What do you mean? Vale's eyes darkened. This ship, the Revenant, it wasn't a weapon for us to use. It was a test. Something left it behind, waiting to see if we'd take it. And we did. His voice dropped lower. Now they want to know what we'll do with it. Kessler exhaled, feeling the weight of humanity's next step. Will we fight? Will we seek diplomacy? Will we run? The Revenant had given them power, but power always came with a price. And now, the true owners of that power had arrived. Humanity's answer. Kessler turned back toward the alien fleet. He could see the choice laid out before him. The Dominion had once laughed at humanity. They had seen them as nothing more than insects, a minor species barely worth notice. And now, an even greater force was here, watching, waiting, and humanity would not kneel. Kessler stepped forward and activated the comms. He took a breath. And then, in a calm, unwavering voice, he spoke. We are humanity. We do not run. If you want this ship, come and take it. A future unwritten silence. The alien fleet did not move. No weapons charged. No war began. Instead, the ships simply faded. One by one, the vessels slipped back into the void, vanishing without a trace, as if they had been satisfied with the answer. Or perhaps, simply waiting for something greater. Kessler let out a slow breath. It wasn't over. Not yet. Humanity had won a war, but now they had announced themselves to the galaxy, and something had taken notice. The last transmission hours later, as the fleet regrouped, Vale approached Kessler on the command deck. You think they'll be back? Kessler asked. Vale didn't answer right away. He simply looked out the viewport, where the last traces of the alien ships had disappeared. Then finally, I think they never left. The warship that was only a myth had changed the galaxy forever. That's the end of today's story. Thank you for listening. Every story I create takes hours of writing, editing, and narration, and your support keeps HFY Genesis alive. If you enjoyed this story, please do me a favor. Hit that like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's a small action for you, but it means everything to me and helps more listeners find these stories. What did you think of today's story? Would you have made the same choices as the characters? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an epic new HFY story. Until next time, stay strong, stay fearless, and remember, humanity always fights back.